Which abilities in Paladins top the charts in just being a little bit rubbish? Well, if you want to find out, watch on as I go through the top 10 worst abilities in Paladins. This video is just for fun. The abilities are ranked in no particular order, but aren't just on power rating, but feeling and how they look too. Be sure to let me know your list in the comments section below. Number 1 is Sky's Hidden. Sky not only made it into my top 5 most hated champions for being annoying to play against a new player with map knowledge, being poor and invisibility somewhat working on people's ignorance, that the other side of the coin is that she is a bad ally just simply because she is so easily countered. This is also why largely Hidden has made it into my top 10 bad abilities list. It is simply countered hard by Illuminate. Even Illuminate 1 makes it very hard to flank somebody outside of their vision to highlight you. That really is the fun element of Sky in a nutshell taken away, stalking enemies and trying to use the map whilst invisible to get behind people. Personally, I think invisible characters can be fun. Team Fortress 2 broaches invisibility with a supplementary mimic ability, though in top-down MOBA games where you see 360 around you and are less ambushed from behind and more stalked from any angle, I do like playing Riki and Bounty Hunter in Dota 2, and it kind of works better. I do like the approach of the reveal state in dropping deployables, which will highlight enemies close to that deployable. It would work less well in a first-person shooter, though ideally, if there could be the first perishable items in the game, something like a cheap Vivian sensor turret, only to reveal enemies near them, could be a little more interesting. That aside, the other huge downside to having Sky's Hidden as her escape ability, or F on PC, is that she doesn't have any vertical, important for flanks, or even horizontal movement. On top of that, you have to delve into cards and quite far to utilize the speed of Hidden, or the extra speed in the card, which I'm not sure is actually worth it over the smoke speed. All in all, I don't think Sky really works at any level of play at the moment, and you can even see her close to you just without the cards, because you see the silhouette if she's close enough. So yeah, the lack of movement ability and totally being countered by a cheap purchase of an Illuminate. Next up at number 2 is Kinessa's Oppressor Mine. If you wanted Mrs. Tickle in the game, well, you have her, with a few points spent in enemies hit by Oppressor Mine card and also range, though for the most part people's attention is to kill enemies and not just to tickle them lightly, so you probably won't be picking those up. Kinessa's Oppressor Mines did actually used to be quite good when they slowed enemies, which made it easier for snipers to trace their foes. Who am I kidding? 90% of the players still missed 90% of the shots, but you get where I'm going with this, and I can't count myself out of that big majority. Though the developers decided to up the damage slightly over that actually powerful slow. Personally, I find the damage is still a bit of a joke, so it isn't really the best of the trade-offs for me. The mines are the downsides that do not target stealth enemies like Strix Reveal, for example, plus they are so weak paced that most champions can pick them off with a mere shot. On top of that, they aren't the easiest to pinpoint and drop down without peeking from your cover and looking where it's going to go, which actually makes you quite vulnerable when you're peeking for it. And also you can't take a shot whilst you're doing it, so it's a toss-up of do you actually even bother. The big pros are that the sound alerts you to enemies that might be sneaking up on you, or if you use one more as a warning device, plus you can practically reveal enemies by tracking them taking damage from your mines. It is just one of those abilities that a champion has as a little bit of an extra, rather than something integral to their kit, and I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing in the world, as Kinessa at high levels can still be lethal. Next up, at number 3 is Charlene's Impale. I would call this the wonky arrow. Between losing 200 FPS, drawing a bow every time you play Charlene at the moment, which to the credit of the developers they are actually actively working on fixing as a priority, though add this on top of just the sheer unpredictability of whether knockback on the arrows will actually place your enemies, to the fact that you need a wall or something extra there to actually stun an enemy. It makes Charlene's Impaler Arrow very situational, and sometimes detrimental if you then make the wrong play thinking you'll get a stun, for example. Charlene has also been nerfed with the planted so that most enemies aren't a one stun to kill, which does make sense, but at the same time they've kept the knockback distance and the odder properties. Coming back to wonkiness, this is probably my biggest pet peeve. There doesn't seem to be any physics-based logic on how an enemy will travel when hit by the arrow. It seems that the angle you hit them from, what they're doing at the time, what terrain they are, can wildly upset the trajectory of where they will end up. A lot of the time, hardly anywhere from where they've started, to be honest. I do like the concept of having an arrow that would impale somebody to a wall, but it doesn't actually look that great. It is very, very situational at the moment, and in my opinion needs a little bit of a technical pass and maybe slight buff to the knockback. Next up is Moji's Scamper. She, or should I say they, are big. very big. Probably the most portly feeling champion in the realm is Moji. To try and combat their bullishness, you might expect that they would have maybe a big vertical jump to combat this, like Buck's heroic leap. Well, you'd be very wrong. Whilst looking relatively amusing scampering along the ground like a Looney Tunes character, the negatives stack up against that. A big problem with Moji's Scamper is that it also does not provide momentum whilst in the air, only when your feet are touching the ground, so it further limits how well you can duck, dip, dive, and dodge whilst it is active, although you can sort of jump around with it and then your speed is a bit more unpredictable. It does also last for 1.5 seconds, and can be cancelled with abilities, but it also does feel awkward to steer, almost as bad as those derby cars in the OG Mario Party, because you're forced forward, so it's just awkward. My biggest issue with it is that you are simply so big and still so easy to hit while scampering. It kind of renders the escape a little more aggressive and situational, so that's 2 pose down for me. Next up, at number 5, is Willow Seedlings. It is literally just Dredge's broadside, but with a big cooldown and less damage. I mean, Dredge doesn't have a cooldown broadside and can just spam it, whereas the poor Willow will have to wait a base 15 seconds before they can do it again. Overall, the Dredge broadside does pretty much 1000 extra damage as well. Yes, Willow Seedlings has a bigger area, but it also has a really loud timer sound that, if you haven't already spotted the warning indicator, will give you the know-how to get out of there. If you do opt to have the Seedling talent card, you lose a lot in the way of burst damage, which Blastfire gives, and in some ways I feel the Willow needs that in-hand weapon damage, and Blastfire has become almost an essential pick. Over the nerf Dead Zone, obviously, talent card, which used to burst people down pretty quickly. I do think the biggest takeaway is that it's just too easy to walk away from. Newer players may not pick on the timings as well, or might not realize they're standing on close to their doom, though others will just move away, as almost all champions have an escape ability. I also do think that the animation and sounds are pretty unique for Seedling, the design is a cool concept, and that is definitely a bonus. Up next, at number 6, is Crocs Totem. Our resident Blue Boy and Orc Lord may have made it into my best ultimates video with Tempest, though his Totem is making it into my worst slots. I do feel that the CC immunity on Totemic Ward can counter the Makoa's Hook and big stuns, though to heal with the Totem, you have to fully commit to a Totem loadout at the cost of everything else. Plus, the reset is awkward with a Ghost Walk card, which you might waste and then leave yourself vulnerable. Plus, its range, even after buffs, feels not amazing compared to a lot of the point-and-click healers. The Totem being so easy destroyable, especially by area of effect champions, puts it in my list as one of the worst. Part of the reason is he almost always is a better damage than he is a healer. In short, it is one of the least versatile and awkward heals in the game. Next up is Dredges Kraken. Oh boy, where do I start here? Our salty boy hasn't been shy of critique and controversy throughout his life, though whilst he did make it into my most hated champions video, I do quite enjoy the less spammy Harpoon Mine Dredge. His ult, on the other hand, has gone from useless to equally as useless. On top of its uselessness is a frustration that it is in fact a pretty cool concept, with the Kraken lashing out at enemies in the center, though for whatever design reason it was actually hardly noticeable in the pre-change Dredge, who had a weaker Sky ultimate essentially. The new ultimate that provides a more sizable knockback makes this a lot more clear with the Kraken actually hitting people, but on the other hand now tickles enemies and the knockback still isn't that sizable or controllable enough to make a difference to the ultimate. The other big downside is it's still really easy to click in the wrong place or hit an invisible wall with the ultimate, though even when you get it down in the exact right place and the right spot, enemies are likely to be able to just run away from it, so it kind of is a thumbs down from me. Next up is Io Begone. There's not really a lot to say about this. It takes the positives of Lian's ultimate, a short invulnerability, then puts it on an arguably worse mix of her and Torvald's ultimate in terms of damage and blasting people away. Yes, it can knock people off the map and occasionally gets a team wipe, though on other maps it is pretty meh. The biggest downside is it's still, even with the fixes, it loves to clip on any pixel of the map you might even not see. You have to leave a whale's width between you and anything remotely terrain-like around you. I think it should be called Clip and Gone. Your ult will be wasted so many times. Next up at number 9 is Atlas Exile. This could and can be one of the best ultimates in the game. It's pretty devastating CC that can win a point. The problem is that the majority of players cannot time it well and can often save an enemy where they may otherwise be killed. I mean, I can count on one hand the times that it has won a point in the game, though I can think of every other game where they've saved enemies, given time for them to gather reinforcements, or even given them cap time whilst invulnerable. It's just one of those. Finally, at number 10 is Strix's Flashbang. Welp. I mean, if the Flashbang wasn't mostly fixed and still gave the black screen for DirectX 11 users, I could put it in this list just for that, as being something so annoying to go against. On the other hand, if the card to reset this Flashbang wasn't nerfed before the Pirate's Treasure patch, then it would be one of the best ultimates in the game, but again might actually make it into my list as being the most annoying ability in the game. But as it stands, it is merely mediocre. It has come from crazy, a little bit broken, to just kinda meh. It is really hard to confirm in a group of enemies, and even then, its effect is nominal out in the air of effect. Plus, it can win you a duel up close by dodging and dipping against an opponent that you're up against, but its damage is nominal, and good players will probably be able to track you just by sound alone or guess where you are. And slightly hard to capitalize on, but I think this is probably, out of all the abilities in my list, the one that most people will disagree with me on. The other big takeaway that it is kind of one of the most boring ultimates in the game. It is literally just a lobbed grenade that makes your screen go white. It's a flashbang. It is a flashbang. That's probably why I don't like it. It's just so plain. It's just so vanilla. It's not a Kamehameha, that's for sure. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Let me know in the comments section whether you agree or disagree with the list in the comments, whether you add, remove, or change any. What would your list be essentially? I'll see you all next time anyway, folks. Joshino.